Hey folks, welcome back to the Edupedia world, and I am Abhinay Gupta. And we are again continuing with the interesting topic, which is the interpretation of statute, deeds and documents. Right? We have already had few classes on this chapter, on this lecture. Right? I hope you are going through them, because if you have not been through them, please go through them, otherwise you will not understand what we are discussing about. Right? Because this is a different level of chapter. We are not doing sections over here. Right? So I have given you the basics in the previous lecture. Go back to it, view it, and come back over here. I'll be waiting for that. Right? So, and those of you who have been following me through all the other lectures, for them we can move ahead with the lectures. Right? So, what have we already done so far? I'm just taking 10-15 seconds for that. That is meaning of the statute, document, instrument, deed and interpretation we have already seen. Then we have seen the basic rules of interpretation or construction, right? And we have seen that we have two categories of rule, that is the primary rule and the secondary rule. In the primary rule we have 6 rules, and in the secondary rule we have the other 3 rules, right? So the primary rule says, number 1, rule of literal construction, rule of reasonable construction, rule of harmonious construction, rule of beneficial construction, rule of exceptional construction, and the rules of agisdem generis. Right? So these 6 rules, literal, reasonable, harmonious, beneficial, exceptional and agisdem generis, form part of your primary rule. Right? And then you have 3 secondary rules. That is, number 1, noscitur ascausis. Sorry, even I went wrong. It is noscitur ascausis. Number 2, expressio unis est exclusio altarius, and number 3, contemporaneous expositio. Right? I have been using this terminology so long, right? I'm like used to it. I can use it in regular life, right? But still sometimes I go wrong with that, right? It's a tongue twister. Why? Because we are not used to pronouncing such words. Right? So I hope now the people who were there with me in the previous lectures, they have already marked up the names of these rules. Right? So if you have, we move on to the description and analysis of each rule individually. So first rule that we have is the rule of literal construction. Right? And if you remember, then we have already discussed what rule of literal construction would mean. And if any one of you think that yes, my lectures are going, the speed of my lecture, right, the speed of what I say, if it is a little higher for you, right, please let me know in your comment box so that I can lower the speed if you're not able to follow it. Right? Because I've seen, right, basically when we are teaching a large crowd, there are some people who are not able to match up with the pace. So if somebody is feeling that difficulty, please let me know in the comment box so that I can modulate the speed further. Right? Otherwise, I think this is an appropriate level of speed and it is easy for you people to understand. So when we talk about the rules of literal construction, right, we go by the natural meaning of the terms, the natural meaning of the word used, the natural meaning of the sentence framed. Right? Where that natural meaning will not be influenced by any previous law which is already enacted. Right? It is just the plain text that we read and we interpret in the literal sense, in the cognate sense that it is. Right? So the sentences will be given the natural meaning depending upon the wordings that have been used in that sentence. Right? Read each word individually, interpret them, combine them and then get the meaning. Nothing doing after that. Right? You don't need to see what was beneath it, what was the cause that brought such rule, right? What is it trying to amend? Nothing. Just see, okay, these are plain text. Forget about that it is a law, it is an act, it is a rule, whatever it is. Forget about everything. Just think that, okay, these are plain text, this is a statement given over here. How do I interpret the statement? Or how will a class 10 student or class 9 student interpret the statement who has no knowledge about law? Right? So the way that class 10 student will interpret the statement is the rule of literal construction. Right? Because his judgment, his interpretation will not be influenced by any other law that he has studied. He doesn't know any basics, he doesn't know any background. What he knows is what the words mean. And if he is not aware of any word, right? If he does not know any word, he can look up in the dictionary and then interpret it according to what the dictionary says, without being influenced by any further considerations. That is rule of literal construction, right? This interpretation does not require you to add or subtract any word from that statement. Okay, let me see, if we add these words, right, the meanings are clear, or if we just avoid these words and just be still with these, the meanings are clear. You're not allowed to do that. All the words that are used over there, interpret the meaning and then interpret the meaning of the sentence, and that is the rule of literal construction. No matter if it does not make any sense as per the law, because that is the rule. If it is not making any sense, the rule goes for a toss. The rule flops over there and then you move on to the other rules, right? So first, whenever you get anything in law that you need to study, that you need to interpret, you will take it literally. And if that literal interpretation fails, that is only when you move on to the other rules, right? That means this rule, the rule of literal construction, this is the primary rule, this is the first rule that has to be applied and checked. And only on its failure you move on to the other rules, right? Right. So now we move on to see what is the applicability of the rule. So this is the first and the foremost rule of interpretation. It is the primary rule, right? It is the first approach. Whenever you go on to interpret a statute, right, when you study the statute, deed the document, this is how you first interpret it. You have been studying, right? You have been studying your law as well. You have been studying SEBI, banking, SERFASI, FEMA and all the acts. Did you apply any rules so far? No. What you did is you went on with the plain reading and interpreting it, right? So you have always been using the rule of literal construction. Only when this rule is not applicable, it is the situation when you have to move on to other rules. Otherwise, rule of literal construction will work for majority of times. When I say majority, I don't only mean 51%, right, or more than 50%. I say it is applicable for more than 70-75%. Other places you have to use the rules, right? Now again, where are these rules applicable? We have seen, okay, it is a primary rule, we apply it everywhere. And when does it fail, right? First we'll see when does it pass. It will pass when the meaning is clear. Words are clear, you can interpret it, you know the meaning, the language is very plain, they don't mean to get into it, they don't mean to be sarcastic about anything. And if you join the words, if you interpret the meaning of the words and then the meaning of the sentence, then you get only one meaning, right? With the literal construction, you get only one meaning, then it is working. If you have an ambiguity, if you have more than one meaning that can be derived and you get a confusion over there, you move on to the other rules. So if there is no ambiguity and you understand that yes, our legislature means to say this, straightforward, nothing over there, right? Then you say, okay, the rule of literal construction is working, right? It is playing its game over here. And believe me, 75-80% of time it does, right? Third point is only one meaning is possible. Okay, we have discussed it, right? The language is very plain, right? And if you interpret it, you do not get any other meaning. That is the only one meaning that you can interpret out of it, right? So that is when this rule is applicable. It is a primary rule, so first you have to apply it. No, you don't have an option. And then it will work only if the words are clear, only one meaning can be derived, and the text is plain. There is no ambiguity, right? Moving on, now we see what are the key features of this rule, right? So if we understand the key features of the rule, here we have on the screen: literal construction, grammatical meaning, ordinary meaning and technical meaning. These are the features, right, that you have to understand. So when we talk about literal construction, right, you know why we have this rules of interpretation? I discussed it in the first class, right? Because the court, they need it. They cannot sit with the legislature and discuss, hey man, what did you want to say out of it? Because I see there are two meanings, right? And the legislature will say, yeah, I meant the second one. And the court is like, okay, the second one. Okay guys, this is the second meaning, and we interpret it and the case is dismissed. No, it cannot do like that, right? It cannot sit with the legislature for a discussion. So it has to interpret it on its own, right? So that is why these rules have been framed. These rules, they support the court to interpret what the legislature actually wants to say, right? So they will use it. First of all, they'll use the literal construction where they go ahead with the meaning of the text, the plain meaning, right? The literal sense, unless and until it brings out some abnormal meaning, and you know that okay, this meaning is not taking place over here, right? Or if the meaning is defeating the purpose, right? You are referring to particular section, you are referring to the particular enactment of the law, and then you see that no, if I read the section, I think this is talking about something else, right? It is deviating from the topic, it is defeating the purpose for which it is created. So that means you know that okay, we are going in the wrong direction, we did not interpret it, right? Because legislature will not bring out such law and such things, right? You know, first a bill is passed, and then there are two houses in the parliament through which that bill goes through, and then the parliament approves it, and finally it comes out. So there are a lot of parity checks, right? So they won't make that blunder. So if they have framed the rule for any particular thing, if they have framed the act for reference, right, then believe me, they are correct, right? So if you feel it is wrong, that means you are not interpreting it in the correct manner, or the rule of literal construction fails over there, right? Then you have to apply other rule and get to the correct meaning of the legislature, the correct meaning of the statute, right? That means when you are interpreting the statute, when you are applying the literal construction, you do not add any word, you do not decrease or reduce any word. Cognate sense, whatever it means, you go ahead with it, right? Unless you feel that no, it is necessary, right? Because otherwise the meaning becomes absurd, right? It is unreasonable, it is abnormal, right? Then you amend the rule and go with the other rules of interpretation. Next you have the grammatical meaning, which means that when you are interpreting the statement in the statute, right, you use the meaning of the grammar. That means whatever are the rules that you have studied in the grammar, right? What is noun, what is verb, what is adjective, how do you frame a sentence, how do you interpret it, what is the meaning of comma, what is the meaning of exclamation mark and everything, you will have to interpret it exactly according to the grammatical rules that you have studied in your childhood, right? Unless and until it flops, right? Unless and until the literal sense gives an abnormal meaning, you will use the word or you'll use the grammatical rules that you have studied, right? Third, we have ordinary meaning. This means that you should be interpreting it according to the clear words that have been used, right? If we are reading, like if I go on to read the above sentence, right, only one meaning is possible. So what do you mean by these 5 words? It says that okay, you don't have a second meaning, right? Can you interpret it in some other way also? No, it is only one meaning is possible. So this is what it says. When you use it in the ordinary sense. Only one meaning is possible. That is it. Finish. Right? The fourth feature is the technical meaning. Now, what do we mean by technical meaning? Now, understand, right? You are grown-up people. You know law. You know the rules. Right? You know the trade in the market. You know what is going on. You communicate with people. You get to meet a lot of people over there. You have a lot more exposure than that 9-10 student over there, right? So if you give it to the 9-10 student, they will use the literal construction, grammatical meaning and the ordinary meaning over there, right? But if the law is, for example, framed for a particular purpose, right, or in the particular genre, say for import export, right, then the words over there will not be as simple as this. You will have some terminologies included which would relate to import and export, which normal people may not understand, right? But those people who are dealing in the trade, right, those who are dealing in import export, day in day out, they know what is it, what they are into that market, they are performing over there, right? They are in touch, they will understand it very well. That means those words are very commonly used in that parlance, right, in context of import and export, but may not be used in general life. Like you and me, we are sitting over here, we are discussing, then we are not using certain words over there, right? Like the word pilferage, unloading charges, right? There are people who may not understand it. Okay, what is shipment? What is FOB? What is CIF? But those people who are dealing in import export, right, whose business it is or who are providing any services over there, they know what is CIF, they know what is FOB, right? They know what is pilferage. So if you are using a rule over there and you use these words, then the people who are into that parlance, into that genre will understand it. So over there you will have to get the technical meaning of the term, where ordinary meaning fails, but still even that is the rule of literal construction. You're not interpreting it, right? You're not going on to some other rules like reasonable construction, exceptional construction. No, it is just that those words that are used are a little technical, right? And the common person who is outside that trade will not understand. So that is one thing that will be included, right? So don't think that all of these rules can be interpreted by the class 9-10 people. Otherwise they would have studied law, right? You remember when you were in IPCC or when you started with the final for the first time? Or even CPT, when you used to study about the voidable contract, right? You found it to be difficult. You could not understand the language that they have used. That is why you never study your law and your audit from the bare act over there. The DT, IDT, do you study from the bare act? No, none of you. None of you. I bet on that. Even if some of you refer to the bare act, but you study from the normal notes, that is in the plain text. Why? Because again, bare act becomes difficult to interpret. Right? That is why the rule of literal construction talks about all these features. Now are you clear with it? Can you write the answers if you get any question on these topics? Yes. Right? Now there are two more discussions left in the rule of literal construction. That will be what is the implication. The implication of the rule of literal construction. So here's on the screen. You have 5 implications over there. 1. Give meaning to every word. Cannot be provided by the court. Omission cannot be concluded. Variation would remain if it follows from the word, and no reference to legal decision. Yeah, most of you did not understand what I just read out, right? If I were in your place, even I wouldn't have understood it, and that is why I'm here. I'll explain it to you. The first thing you have is give meaning to every word. As I have already mentioned that you will not exclude any word, neither will you include any word. Whatever words are there in the text, you will interpret it. You will find out the meaning of each of the word and then combine it to get the meaning or derive the meaning of the statement. Right? Because the legislature, when they create this law, right, when the acts have been enacted, you always see that their words are very specific and limited. Right? They don't generalize the term. If there are 4 things to be included, they specifically include all the 4 things. If there can be 2 interpretations, they specify that we are talking about this. So the law, the legislature, in their statute, they do not waste their words. Right? So you know that, okay, whatever words are given over there, all of them are important and all of them will form part in constructing the meaning of the sentence. Right? Next, cannot be provided by the court. What cannot be provided by the court? It means that if the statute did not specify any particular thing, right, if it did not supply any particular information, or if any matter has not been provided in the statute, the court cannot provide it. The court cannot say, I think over here this thing should be included. So let us interpret it, let us include these things. Then at that point of time, the court is not interpreting what the statute has said, what the legislature wants to say. What the court is trying to do is that the court is trying to create a statute. I don't care what is there. Whatever is there, you have to interpret it in that way. You cannot go on creating the statute, right? That is not your job, that is the job of the legislature. Let them do it. So whatever they have given it, your job is to interpret it. You cannot provide for any addition to that. Right? Although the court is referring to a case and the court thinks, no, this has to be there. Okay, this has to be there. Refer it to the parliament, raise the issue, it will be seen over there. But you will not include it. Right? You are not writing the statute. Right? That is the implication. Next you have omissions cannot be concluded. That means the court will not go on to conclude that, okay, this thing has been omitted. No. We know that nothing can be added or taken away from the statute. So whatever has been given, you interpret it that way. You will not say, oh, I think this is omitted, let us interpret it that way. Unless you are sure and you can interpret it that yes, the legislature wants to convey this message, right? They want, the meaning is derived, that is clear, that clearly says that yes, this is there, right? But maybe the legislature did not specifically include it. So at that point of time, you can somewhere take an exception to say that, okay, this is omitted and we'll interpret it that way. You're not adding it, right? You're interpreting it. That, okay, we'll include this. Right? That can be done by the court. Next is variation would remain if it follows from the word. That means you are trying to say that okay, this is the fact, right? But if you refer to the statute and the words over there they deviate, then you will have to deviate. You will understand that okay, if the statute deviates, that means the legislature wants to deviate, right? Your interpretation should not deviate, but if the word is itself deviating, then you can deviate with the thing. That variation would remain if it is there in the literal construction, if it is there in the statute, if it is there in the words used over there. If there is a variation specified, then we will agree with those variations, right? And always remember that when we talk about the law of literal construction, right, we do not refer to any legal decisions that okay, over there in that case we had a similar case and we decided this, so we'll continue with that. No, you will have to refer to the statute, derive its meaning and see what it says. And when you are trying to interpret a statute, you will not refer to the legal decision. While you are framing the final decision, the court can refer to the legal decisions, but when you are interpreting a statute and you say the statute wants to say this, right, over there you will not use the legal decisions that have been taken, right? You will never say that okay, as per the decision the statute wants to say this. No, that was a decision taken by you, taken by the court. That was not a decision included in the statute by the legislature. So don't assume it to be so, right? That is the implication of literal construction, that every word should be given a meaning, right? The court cannot provide for anything additional over there. You cannot assume that the legislature has omitted something, right? And if the words they vary, if they are taking it to the other direction, you will have to go to the other direction, right? And you will never refer to a literal legal decision when you are trying to interpret a literal construction. The last thing that we need to again understand is the limitation of this rule, right? This is not a full-fledged rule, right? There are limitations, and that is the reason why we move on to the other rules. So let us see what the limitations are. So English is a typical language, unlike our Hindi, right? One word may have different meaning at different places. It is depending on how they are used, right? Even the usage can at times be interpreted in a different way, right? There have been instances in the past also that the statute says one thing that is constant, but two tribunals have given two separate interpretation and two separate decisions based on the same statute, and both of them were correct. Why? Because the words that are used in the statute can be interpreted in both the ways, right? So that is the difficulty, and hence we generally try not to go by the literal construction if there is an ambiguity of that sort, right? Then we try to go with the reasonable construction. Okay, what should be the reasonable fact over here? What is the measure that is thought to be overridden? What is the benefit that is tried to be given? Why was this rule framed? So let us look into the matter and then decide as to what decision and what judgment we'll take, right? Because you cannot trust English language. You can have various meanings of the same text and same combination of text as well, right? Next, the ordinary meaning is different from the dictionary meaning. Now, okay, we say that okay, if you don't understand a word, refer to a dictionary. The question is, which dictionary? Oxford dictionary that is generally used in India, or any other dictionary used somewhere else, or other dictionary other than Oxford that are used in India? Which dictionary should we refer? And even when you refer to the dictionary, there are 2-3 meanings given to the same word. Different dictionaries may have different meanings. Some may have a little restricted meaning, the other may have a little more generalized meaning, right? So that when you are using the words in ordinary sense, it may mean something else, and the dictionary may interpret it in some other ways, because dictionary becomes very technical at times, that okay, if this is the word, this is the meaning. But that word, the usage of the word can be at different places and then can have different meanings accordingly, right? So that is the ordinary meaning, which may deviate from the dictionary meaning, right? Then we see that the intention of law is ignored. Why? Because we do not use our brain while interpreting. We do not use our logics over there because it is restricted. You have your logics applied in other rules, but when you're talking about the rule of literal construction, you don't apply your logics. You don't apply the intent of the law. Whatever is given over there, read it as it is, interpret it in its literal sense. Right? So that is the limitation, because law intends something else and that is ignored. Right? So that is the limitation of the literal construction. Right? Next, it always assumes that the law is perfectly drafted. Everything has been very specifically said. For every single point there is a law, but that is not the fact. You cannot draft law that way. That for every different alternative you have a different law. You have a specified law. No. Right? That is not generally possible. Right? So at those places the court, they have to take their own judgment. Right? Because maybe at such situation there is nothing specifically provided in the law. So you have to use other rules. Right? So are you clear with it? Are we done with the rule of literal construction? We have seen the applicability. We have seen the key features of this rule. We have also seen the implication, right? And at last, what are the limitations of the rules? Okay with it? And now I'll disclose one secret, that you have never been asked a question on the rule of literal interpretation. You have been asked questions always on the other rules, right? And I told you that I will ask you, I'll give you a trick that you need to use, right? So you will have to refer to this rule even in that trick. So it was not a waste, right? Because this would create a base for you to interpret the other rules, to understand the other rules, right? So for creating the base, that was important. And that is why I think why Institute did not ask a question on it. Because they know a student will always go through the rule of literal interpretation, because this creates the base for other rules. Only when this rule fails that you go to the other rule. So you have to study this rule. So it thinks that if anybody has studied this chapter, right, they must have studied this rule. So no point testing them on this rule. Right? So you are being tested on other rules that becomes literally a little difficult for you to understand. Clear with that? So with that, this is Abhinay Gupta signing off. I'll see you in the next class. Please stay tuned for that. Thank you and bye-bye.